Handguns are less powerful, harder to hit the target, less effective. So why would they be a primary weapon? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Saddle up for the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, ballistics, use of force, philosophy, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm going to forego the normal lengthy bio and the time you're going to save. Please like, subscribe, leave a review of the podcast. Maybe even pontificate a little bit on whether you should become a patron or not. Step up and support the podcast. Been blessed by Almighty God to be a professional gunfighter and live through it most of my adult life. Military, law enforcement, private contracting. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. Let's get into it. Handguns is a primary. Crazy like a fox. Here's the thing there. For most of you listening, I'm talking about a well-regulated American citizen, armed and ready, watching like a shepherd over the flock until the chief shepherd appears. In our world today, as it stands, and it may change radically in the future, I don't see the future, but as it stands right now, a handgun probably is your primary weapon. There are some exceptions, right? I was a professional big game hunter and guide. My primary was a rifle. So I could walk around and carry a rifle. Most of us, day to day in most jobs, are not walking around with a rifle slung or in their hands. As cool as it would be, most accountants don't have an AR sitting in the corner of their cubicle. Most landscapers probably don't have a Mossberg 590 slung across their back, as cool as that would be. Most soccer dads in the suburbs with a couple of kids are probably not sitting in the bleachers with a foul on their lap, as cool as that might be. So, like it or not, for most of us, our primary is a handgun. So maybe we should treat it as such. I think we are influenced too much, and this is coming from a veteran who served in 2 branches of the armed forces, combat veteran, urban warfare instructor. I think I have the bona fides to speak on this. I think we look too much sometimes at the military for our philosophy because it's different parameters. The military doesn't really emphasize handgun training. Most infantry, in fact, doesn't even get issued a handgun. They get a rifle, and that's it. Specialized infantry, I was one. An assaultman in MOS that no longer exists, 0351. You can look that up if you want to, but I sometimes carried a handgun. And I can tell you that military handgun training, there are some exceptions. It is pretty poor. Also served in the U.S. Army and got some handgun training there. I was in cavalry. It's not great. It's not stellar. Because here's the thing. For the military, the handgun is not a primary weapon. Almost ever. Even if you're issued it, it's probably because, like in my case, I had a rocket launcher, a small shoulder-fired multi-purpose assault weapon. I was rocking demo, right, a satchel charge, which is 16, 1.25 pounds of C4. Or like cavalry, you have a tank, literally a tank with a main gun and a bunch of machine guns. If I'm doing stuff with my handgun, things have gone terribly, terribly wrong. And that's generally the way that the military views handguns. Maybe if you're higher up as an officer, which I was not, you might have it to execute somebody in a time of crisis, right? You may have it to stop a mutiny if you're in the Navy or something. But again, things have gone terribly wrong. No army I'm aware of in history ever has sent their mainline infantry charging into battle with handguns. They may have allowed them to carry, in certain circumstances, handguns as a backup, but again, there it's your secondary. So although we get some really good handguns coming out of the military throughout history, as in the 1911, the Beretta 92, the SIG 226. We might not want to look there too much for doctrine. Because again, for most of us armed, well-regulated citizens, a handgun is our primary. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a truck gun. I have multiple truck guns. I like variety. I like to have a shotgun as my go-to truck, and I like to have a rifle option as my go-to truck. You should have a truck gun. The whole episode's on truck guns. I believe in the truck gun concept. Or Honda Civic gun, or whatever you drive. I don't mean to discriminate. Your Prius gun, right? It's all good. But even if you're in your vehicle and you get carjacked, you're probably not going to be able to grab, unless you got a passenger literally riding shotgun with a shotgun, probably not putting the long gun into action. Most of the time, again, the handgun is going to be our primary, so we should train with it and treat it as such. Here is another truth, and I grew up competition shooting, won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps, and I love precision rifle type shooting. I really, really enjoy it. It is a beautiful martial art. But I switched to handgun shooting for a couple of reasons, because I realized that if I got into a violent altercation to save my life, it was probably going to be with a handgun. Probably wasn't going to be precise rifle shooting. Probably. And here's another truth that got me to... And I have competed in rifles since then. But here's the thing. You can be a really, really good top-notch... I say this from first-hand experience being myself. Be a crack shot with a rifle. You can be a really good, literally gold medalist with a rifle, and be really bad with a handgun. Like horrible with a handgun. Although the inverse I have not found to be true. If somebody is a really, really good handgun shooter, they will likely be a good rifle shooter. They might not be the best, they might not be as good as the gold medalist or whatever, but if they're a good handgun shooter, they will often be a good rifle shooter. And again, the inverse is not true. You can be a really good rifle shooter and a horrible, horrible handgun shooter. Because the handgun is the harder gun to master. It is the harder gun to train with. It is the harder gun to hit with. So for that reason, I transitioned and do most of my training with a handgun. Even today, I still train with a rifle, still train with a shotgun, still train with a knife, still train hand-to-hand combat, still train grappling, still train boxing. But the majority of my training is a handgun because, again, that just makes sense because this is my primary weapon most of the time. I go to Walmart, I'm rocking a handgun. Go to the gym, I got a handgun. I go to the gas station, perhaps one of the most dangerous things for personal safety, got a handgun. I go to church, maybe the most dangerous thing I do as far as there being the potential, sadly, for an active shooter, mass violence. I have a handgun. So it just makes sense for me to treat the handgun like my primary weapon because most of the time it is. And if you are good, rock solid with a handgun because it's a harder gun to master, and you get to introduce a long gun into the situation, hey, that's a great force multiplier. If you got really good trigger control and you're getting really good with a handgun, the rifle is just going to be a force multiplier. But if you spend all your time training with a rifle, good chance your handgun shooting is not good because it's only one-way transferable in my experience. You might understand the basics and hopefully know and apply the safety rules, but that doesn't make you a good handgun shooter. Again, this is from somebody that had a lot of rifle shooting under his belt. And when I first started shooting a handgun, I was bad. I say that from experience. So for those two big reasons, because if you're good with a handgun, if you've got really good trigger control, really good natural point of aim and everything with a handgun, you're going to have the rifle or the shotgun as a force multiplier. Now you should train a little bit with both, with any platform you have, but I think the majority of our training for most people, unless you are a Marine Corps infantryman or Army infantryman or something like that, should be with a handgun. Because a handgun is, by default, generally our primary weapon, unless you're in one of those categories like you're a professional guide. You probably have a rifle on you. But most people, that's not the case. Maybe you're a professional rancher and, on your side-by-side, have an AR-15. I've been there. I managed a ranch. So that might not be the case. But a lot of times when you get off the quad, let's be honest, and you're mending the fence, you leave the AR in the quad. So, again, there the handgun's your primary. So for the vast majority of people, and you could find exceptions, but for the vast majority of people, the handgun is going to be our primary weapon. So is that how you treat it? And you can love other things. You can love other kinds of shooting. You can really enjoy other kinds of shooting. I said I have competed since then in rifle. I won a West Coast Regional Rifle Championship from Alaska down to California and over all the way to Montana, all those western states. I was first place and I wanted to go to nationals in that, and then the Army sent me to school and said, sorry, can't do it. Got to go to the school in the Army. So it is what it is. But I do still like to compete in rifle and I do still like to shoot rifle, but I consider a handgun my primary. And as much as we look to and admire the military, perhaps in this, if we're looking at philosophy and training, we should not really adopt that, because for us, a handgun is our primary for most people. Do you treat it like that? Can you make longer shots with your handgun? I don't care what the average is. I don't care if they say the average shot is 3 yards or less. Well, are they counting executions in that? Are they counting gang executions? Are they counting suicides? And even if that is the average, do you want to be average? Is that what you shoot for in life, to be average? Probably this is not the podcast for you. You should be able to make a long shot with your handgun, because if you got to stop an active shooter, unless you get a chance to run back to your truck, probably you're doing it with a handgun. Likely there's going to be a lot of other people there. You probably want to sink that shot. Do you practice making longer shots with your handgun? Handguns are less effective ballistically than almost any long gun. If you talked about 22 to 22, right? If you shoot a 22 out of a rifle, it's going to be more effective because you get more velocity because you get a longer barrel. But in almost any case, right, it's apples and oranges. The handgun is less effective. The vast majority of handgun rounds are not fatal. Do you practice getting multiple hits on target quickly? Do you practice multiple attackers? Do you practice target transitions? Because that's a bad day if you got to go against multiple people with a handgun. But again, it's probably the gun you're going to have on you. For most people, it is the primary defensive weapon. There are times when you carry a smaller handgun. There are times when I carry a smaller handgun. Most of the time, I carry a full-size fighting handgun. There are some times, like if I'm doing wind sprints out in the forest, that I'll carry what I would call my lightweight, like super small carry gun, which is a 5-shot 357 Magnum. It's not the most capable of combat handguns, so I get there are compromises to be made. And for most people, I would say most people aren't carrying a full-size fighting handgun. I have just come to accept that. But a mid-size fighting handgun is a good compromise. And I'm not saying you should run a Glock. Just like I'm not saying you should eat Little Debbie snacks. But I know a lot of people do. So if you're going to, like that Glock 19 size, that mid-size, most people, I think, if they're honest and are willing to do it, not just making excuses, you can carry a mid-size handgun. And it's not an exact size. But the Glock 19 is the most common. I'm not even saying it's the best one, but it's probably the most ubiquitous. Glock, Smith & Wesson M&P Compact, the mid-size Walther PDP, right? There's a ton. A SIG 229. And again, I like carrying a full-size fighting handgun. I would encourage you that that's better. But most people can carry a mid-size handgun if they are creative with how they carry it. And a full spare magazine. It's talking about it being your primary. If it's a really sticky situation, and it's going to be because you're having to shoot somebody, do you want a LCP? Or do you want a Smith & Wesson M&P Compact? I'm not even talking about the 380 versus the 9. Obviously, the 9 is a more powerful round. I'm not even talking about capacity, right? A lightweight Commander would fit into that. It'd be a great gun. Lightweight Commander in 45. It's a very good shootable gun, and I'm mostly talking about that, the shootability, the ability to have real estate on the gun to clear a malfunction. Try clearing a double feed in a Ruger LCP versus a double feed in a Smith & Wesson M&P Compact. It's just a whole different thing, right? Imagine you got multiple attackers. Imagine you have to make long shots. And I'm totally aware that you can make long shots with small guns. In fact, my Smith & Wesson, 357 J-frame is probably mechanically one of the most accurate guns that I have. But the shooter comes into that equation too. Can I make a 25-yard headshot? Yeah. I used to, just for fun, I had one of the guns I wish that I had kept because it was just so convenient sometimes, was a Keltec P32. And I used to bang out headshots like consecutively at 25 yards, a little teeny plate, even smaller than a head, because that's what I had to practice on at 25 yards with that P32. Can you make longer shots with a tiny handgun? You can, but it's a lot easier, and especially to get consecutive follow-up shots with a larger mid-size to full-size handgun. And are there times when a smaller gun makes more sense? Yes, but what I'm saying is look at ways to carry a mid-size to full-size gun instead of making excuses why you can't. And then sometimes you can see that a small gun is better than no gun. But maybe if it's your go-to primary weapon, an uber small micro 9 or even smaller 380, maybe that's not the best choice. And again, there's times when that might be what you carry, but if you can, most of the time, if you consider that your primary weapon, is that really what you want as your primary weapon? Would you be happy with that if you're at church and an active shooter breaks out? If you're at the mall, do people still go to malls? If you're at the mall and something bad happens. If you're, I don't know, you probably shouldn't do this, but you find yourself at the ATM late at night. Do people still use ATMs? I'm a little unplugged from society, as you might you might gather. But let's say you're at the ATM or at a gas station late at night, and it's not one meth addict that comes up to you trying to get your money. It's 3, and they're fairly well coordinated. Comes right up to you. One's on the other side of your car, and one's on the other side of the gas pump. Again, considering that the handgun is probably your primary gun most of the time, do you consider it like that? Do you train like that? Knowing that the handgun, and I don't care caliber warriors, 9, 40, 45, 357 SIG, they're all fairly weak compared to rifle rounds and especially compared to shotgun rounds at close range. They're all fairly anemic when compared to those rounds. So, considering the handgun is usually your primary, do you do your very best to pick the best carry defensive handgun ammunition? And not that some YouTube person said, not the next game-changing round that comes out, but like a proven, street-proven round that works reliably out of your gun, that gives you the best ballistic performance you can reasonably expect. And I don't care how good that hollow point is, they don't always expand all the time. Are you giving yourself the best chance? Is that one accurate out of your gun? Can you make long shots with that ammo? Not, you always train with 115 grain Winchester white box and you carry 135 grain critical duty plus P. And you got to make that long shot. Is that 135 grain plus P going to hit where you're shooting at? Well, who knows? Unless that's what you're training with. One of the reasons I don't generally run 135 grains, because I generally can't find training 135 grains. But anyway, are you giving yourself the best chances? Knowing that the handgun is limited. Knowing that hollow points are velocity based. If you can go with a little bit longer barrel, do you run a little bit longer barrel? Knowing that it gives you a little bit more edge. A little bit more, and not even just a few foot-pounds that you get, because you do, out of a longer barrel, you get more velocity and hence more foot-pounds, but that may or may not make a difference. But the greater probability that that hollow point is actually going to expand. Just that 1 inch in your whole carry apparatus, your gun, your holster, all that, does it maybe make sense to carry a little bit longer barrel? Knowing that it's probably going to be the only gun you have on you. If you have a malfunction, can you reasonably clear a malfunction? A double feed, a failure to fire. A lot of those uber small guns, when your hand's hanging halfway off the gun, even if you take the shootability out of the equation, just the biomechanics of clearing malfunctions on those things is going to take you a lot longer. Maybe you don't have a lot longer. So you guys said you wanted more philosophy episodes. So in keeping with that, maybe it would behoove us to consider the handgun our primary gun, our primary weapon. Because unless most of the time you carry a rifle or a shotgun, it's the weapon you're going to have on you. Perhaps you have a knife, but if you have a handgun and a knife, then handgun is your primary. And maybe the world will drastically change in the near future and we'll all be rolling around with .308 rifles. That'll be the new normal. Talking about new normals. But until that day comes and you have to survive to get to that day, for most of us, the handgun is the gun that we have. It is our go-to weapon. Maybe consider a mid to full-size gun. Maybe consider, after you're already competent with a handgun with iron sights, putting an optical sight on there, a red dot. Something like that. Not a cheap one, a good one. Maybe not carrying in the most convenient place, but in the place where you can get a quick draw. Just a different way to look at it. Even if you love rifles, even if you love AR-15s, if you have a budget, maybe having the, and I'm not telling you not to have nice, I'm blessed to have really nice guns. Maybe having the several $1,000 super nice Daniel Defense AR, and they're really nice ARs, and carrying the budget handgun, maybe the priorities there are messed up. Maybe have a really good top tier handgun with a good optic on it, and a decent mid-tier AR until you get the money for both the really nice handgun and the Daniel Defense AR makes more sense. Because if stuff goes down, probably the handgun is what you're going to have. And I touched on this in another episode, and I don't know if it'll come out before or after this because I haven't scheduled it yet. Just a little bit of how the sausage is made. But I touched on it. Home invasions. I'm not a big fan of the handgun for a home invasion. Probably want a shotgun. Well, a lot of people today probably want a rifle. I would say that the shotgun makes more sense. But a lot of people will go to that AR and they'll say, well, that's my home defense gun. It's got to be great. And I would say, yeah, you should have a really good home defense gun. And you should have a long gun for home defense. We could sit here and debate, a carbine versus a shotgun. Whatever. Both are exponentially better than a handgun. But here's the thing. A lot of people picture this bump in the night. And you should be ready for that. But if you look at the statistics, many home invasions, many break-ins happen during the day. That's a real thing. A bump in the night at 3 a.m, that's a thing that can happen too for sure. But a lot of people that professionally break into houses that are like the top tier guys, they do it during the day. So if you're Daniel, most people live in like a domicile with multiple levels or their bedroom is somewhere fairly far away. Right? If you're whatever people normally do or on the couch watching Netflix and somebody kicks your door down, if that Daniel Defense is upstairs in your room, hopefully you're a much faster sprinter than the other guy. If he's got a gun, you got to run all the way upstairs without getting shot. So even in that scenario, hopefully you're still carrying. Until you make it to your long gun, your handgun is the gun you're going to have. Even in a lot of home invasion scenarios, your handgun is going to be the gun you have on you. You can make it to your long gun. That's fantastic. Again, it's a great force multiplier. And if you can introduce a long gun, like you do get that classic bump in the night at 3 a.m. and the gun is right next to your bed, that's much better than a handgun. But again, a lot of home invasions and stuff, a lot of break-ins during the day. So you have to make it to that home defense gun. And I would reckon many people keep their home defense gun in their bedroom. So if that person kicks on your door and they're armed and they've got a gun pointed at you, can you make it to that gun without getting shot? If not, then the handgun is what you got to work with. So anyway, just some thoughts on looking at the handgun as a primary weapon, maybe treating it a little bit different. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Tactical tip of the day. What could be more tactical than a Q-tip? I mentioned running optic on your go-to handgun. You might want to consider. I'm not saying it's always better, but it's definitely a force multiplier. I was kind of a Luddite. I was against those a lot longer than I should have been until I actually ran them firsthand. That said, if you start running an optic on your handgun, your carry gun, you might find that you go through Q-tips like a woman does. I don't know all the things that women do with Q-tips, but it seems to be they go through a lot of them. Well, you might go through a lot of them too if you start carrying a handgun with an optic. So you might want to make that part of your regiment. when you get your wind down routine, you're taking your gun off of your body for the day and setting it, on your bed or wherever you set it for the night. You hit it with the Q-tip. It's the sweat, the grime, the dust, the dirt. Those optics seem to collect dust and dirt. I've never had, I don't know. It's usually not so dirty I can't see through it. Also stay on it and maintain it. So just having a box of Q-tips around. When it's time to take that gun off, you hit it a little bit with a dry, clean Q-tip. Also, another tactical tip, if you're used to running a really wet gun and used to putting a lot of lube on that barrel hood, if you're going to run an optic, you might think about running less lube on there or getting a much thicker lubricant, because a lot of times that can splatter up and get on the front of the glass and smear. And I've never had it so bad that I couldn't use the gun, but it's something to consider if you're going to start running an optic. Those are your tactical tips of the day, your tactical verse of the day. This is spoken by Peter in the book of Acts. We ought to obey God rather than men. It's going to let you stew on that and ruminate on that for a little bit. And you want to read that in context. I'm not saying you can always just disobey, but you might want to read that in context. We ought to obey God rather than men. Right? Men tell other men to do all kinds of horrible things. Men in authority. Look at democide. Look at how many men in the 20th century, men, women, children, were killed by their own governments. That doesn't negate you shall not murder just because somebody told you that it's now legal. So, anyway, again, stew on that, ruminate on that. Probably want to read that in its context. Probably want to read the whole Bible, obviously. But anyway, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.